Thank you for auditing the always positive, unedited new music review show hosted by a French professor who's going to be reviewing the first 2 pages of Frankenstein by The National. Now, before I get into my sort of framing device for this review, I need to talk about the emotional dynamism that's on display here. So, it's a very, very emotional album, in my opinion. It gets me in what Labyrinth calls the feels. And part of the reason why is that I've listened to this album in emotional highs and emotional lows. So I recently took my daughter to a Regatta de Very Blanca. It's a thing where people row. It's a huge event, tons of people all over the place, down in Saratoga in New York. And while I was driving there, I was listening to this music with her. And it's just a great feeling. One of the best things about being a parent, driving with your kid and having them talk to you about their life, talking to them about your life, all this kind of great stuff. And this music is kind of driving and pulsing and going along. And it really helped me feel very connected in this great familial way. And then I dropped her off at her boat, and then I had this just crazy moment where I was flooded with this very, very sad feeling. Very, very sad feeling, which made it very hard for me to connect to people. Now, when you're at a regatta, you're surrounded by people, and you go to the place where the other people from your town are. And I'm like sitting there, and I can't relate to them, I can't talk to them. And there's this one line from the National album that kept ringing through my head. Don't know what to say to people, it only makes things worse. So I'm listening to this album by myself, walking around in Saratoga, this beautiful area, just gorgeous, but just getting more and more sad, more and more deep into these very dark, lonely, depressed feelings. And the music is only feeding those. So my initial thing about this album is its ability to have that kind of emotional dynamism, which makes sense if you dig a little bit in. I didn't do a ton of research, but a little bit. It's mostly written by somebody who is struggling with depression, but who is happily married and co-writes some of these songs with his wife. It makes sense I would relate to that because I am currently realistically in a state of personal depression, which I will describe at the end of this video a little bit more in detail. It's really just grief, nothing too big, while also being very happy. I have a new baby, I love my kids, I love my job, everything's great, So the emotional dynamism that he is displaying is felt by me. Now, I knew I was going to talk about this, and last night I had a nightmare. I had a nightmare that I was teaching a class that was also this video. And while I was teaching, I was talking about this album, and then I saw someone wearing a hat for the radio station WBCN in Boston, which is now defunct. And I started talking about my history with that radio station, about calling in and requesting when the levee breaks when I was writing a paper on Stoicism in 8th grade. And once I started talking about myself, the entire class emptied out, except for 5 people in the back, and I had to move to a smaller classroom. So I'm not going to get super personal beyond what I just said, beyond this sort of image of me being surrounded by a sea of Helly Hansen wearing nobodies, just sort of unable to communicate, while sort of diving deeper and deeper into this sense of isolation. So with this sadness and this happiness, it's hard to sort of place this album for me. Even the music itself, it's hard to really place it in a genre. I suppose it's rock, but it's not really rocky rock. It's sort of folk, but not really folky folk. I really mainly know The National through Taylor Swift. If you don't know my history, I stopped paying attention to new music between 2002 and 2018. I was vaguely aware of The National in the same way I was vaguely aware of Interpol. And I know that they're totally different bands, but the way they were presented to me is kind of mixed in together. And you be offended, unsubscribe, dislike, never watch this video if that pisses you off. I'm just telling you the truth about how I come to The National. I realize they're from Cincinnati, which makes me happy. Cincinnati is a very interesting town. I've gone to a couple conferences there. I have many friends from there. As a Star Wars collector, it's a very important place. I've eaten 3-way chili many times. The terminally German names of all the members of The National make sense when you think of the history of Cincinnati. So that's kind of a nice aspect here. But really, it's that emotional dynamism that makes it so great. It's its ability to communicate depression, and really it's just really, really good lyricism. While the music is great, it is just this completely elegant, straddling the line between sort of precious and direct in its writing. The music is solid. It's never particularly catchy. The thing about it is that it's expertly produced, just very, very, very well produced. But it's produced in such a way that it doesn't draw a lot of attention to itself. In that way, It reminds me a lot of Folkmore and Evermore and Everlore and Folklore, right? It reminds me a lot of those Taylor Swift albums because part of what makes it so great, obviously, is Taylor singing and Taylor songwriting. But the production, when you really listen to it, it just unveils these layers and this depth, and that's what we have here. But all of that is to say nothing of what I'm really interested in. What the hell does this album have to do with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley from 1818? I am a literature professor, at least I was when I had enough students to be a literature professor. Not of English, of French, but I read this book. Well, let me say, I read this book in high school. Emphasis on the this. I didn't read a single book in high school except for Frankenstein. I managed to get away with my sort of innate intelligence and my ability to BS my way through anything. So I was a terrible, terrible, terrible high school student. Really bad. But I read Frankenstein, and I liked it. And so I've been very happy. Since this album came out, I've reread about half of it. It's available as a book on tape through YouTube. LibriVox is a great service. It's all free. It's a great way to listen. But this is called the first 2 pages of Frankenstein. And this is the problem. There's the frontispiece or Modern Prometheus. What do they mean by the first 2 pages? Do they mean the author's introduction? Okay, this was from the 1831 edition of the book, and it's still reprinted in most editions. This is a fascinating introduction by Mary Shelley where she describes herself as a better dreamer than author. To quote her, "My dreams were at once more fantastic and agreeable than my writings." So here, if you think about these 2 pages, that's pretty fascinating. I think this would be more interesting from the perspective of a female artist, because quite often female artists are relegated or sort of treated as less seriously than male artists, and sort of that they're just sort of doing things out of fancy. It's almost as though she's downplaying her own greatness to not intimidate other people, which a lot of women have to do in creative fields or scientific fields or in any fields at all, thanks to patriarchy, right? So is that it? Is that the first 2 pages? I don't know. If we go past the author's introduction, oh no, there's also the author's preface, which is actually just 2 pages. So maybe this is it, the preface from the 1818 initial edition, where she's basically apologizing for the entire book. This is what authors used to do a lot. They basically apologize for the things that are going to bother you. Like, why is it so fantastical? Why are the characters like this? Why is the subject the way that it is? Because as you know, Frankenstein's a fairly horrific story. But maybe not those first 2 pages. Maybe the first 2 pages, they mean the first 2 pages of this letter. So if you don't know, Frankenstein is very interestingly conceived of. In the 18th century, there's this huge fad of what's called epistolary novels, which means novels written as letters back and forth. I personally despise the epistolary form. I find it laborious and annoying, but it was a la mode, Like, if you read Dracula, Dracula is not even about vampires. Dracula is about writing letters. Seriously, reread it. It's crazy. But what's nice about Frankenstein is that the epistolary framing device, this letter between Walton, who's an explorer, and his sister, are really just at the beginning and the end. So this first letter is about the great purpose of being an Arctic explorer. All these letters to Margaret. So is that what he means, the first 2 pages of the letters? Or, after all that, does he mean the first 2 pages of chapter 1, the part where Victor von Frankenstein, starts telling his story? This is the album I would like to make. This is what interests me the most, because this is about the tenderness that Victor von Frankenstein felt as a child. This person who created a monster, seen as the archetype of the crazy scientist, actually had this bizarrely... Listen to the way he describes his childhood. I typed it out here. My eyes are too 45 years old to read this text anymore. My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything, their idol, and something better, their child. The innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. So maybe this is it. Maybe it's going to be a story about a sort of failed, the inability to take the kindness that was given to you by your parents and carry that forward in life. You know, a sort of a fall from moral grace. So these are all the things that are going on in my head while I'm listening to this album. I reread all these pages. I'm like, what is the answer? What is Matt Berringer, the lyricist, Berringer, what is his idea with this? Fortunately, after my third listen, I finally cracked open Lyric Genius, and I found an annotation to my favorite song on the album where he explains in a Zane Lowe interview. He was inspired by certain words in the first 2 pages. The words were tranquilize and the ocean, about being in an icy tundra. That's what it felt like. That was my way into writing about my inability to write. So we have our answer. He is Watson. This is written from the perspective not of Frankenstein's monster, not of Dr. von Frankenstein, but of the person who finds Frankenstein in the snow. So this is where things get really interesting. This is where I think this is probably the most interesting way to take it when we try to understand what this album is really about. I'm now going to read in full the quote from the first 2 pages of Frankenstein that he's talking about. These reflections have dispelled the agitation with which I began my letter, and I feel my heart glow with an enthusiasm which elevates me to heaven, for nothing contributes so much to tranquilize the mind as a steady purpose, a point on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years. I have read with ardor the accounts of various voyages which have been made into the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean through the seas which surround the pole. You may remember that a history of all the voyages made for the purposes of discovery composed the whole of our good Uncle Thomas's library. My education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. These volumes were my study day and night, and familiarity with them increased the regret which I had felt as a child on learning that my father's dying injunction had forbidden my uncle to allow me to embark on a seafaring life. So this is Walton talking about the origin of his mania. Why is he trying to find a secret passage through the North Pole? What is he doing up there? He is positing himself as some kind of great hero who has found great purpose. But this is the problem. He's wrong. He's wrong, and Frankenstein was wrong. This ambition is sad. Frankenstein is not a horror story. It's a tragedy. It's it's not scary, it's sad. It's not about the sadness even of the monster, even of the idea of human beings being created and thrown into a universe they don't understand and all that. No. When you understand that Walton is how we phrase everything, did I call him Watson earlier? Excuse me. Walton is the person who is the center of the story, really. It's his ambition to become the great explorer, to find meaning in his life by finding this passage, to find the secret of the magnet, to save the world, that is an echo of Frankenstein's own ambition to solve the riddle of life, to become so powerful with the force that he could even create life. Okay? That's the goal. That's the goal of both of them, is to serve their ambition and to do something so great. So what does that mean in the context of this album? Well, that's what the album is. This album now all of a sudden becomes something akin to creating Frankenstein or finding the passage, a work of great ambition and focus. The ideal is to tranquilize the ocean. Those are the words that Berringer points out, and that's what's at the center. But, like, the last 2 pages of Frankenstein, okay? I'm not talking about Harold Bloom's afterword. Bloom is great. I'm talking about the last words of Dr. Frankenstein, okay? The last 2 pages, what he says to Walton, okay? The point of the story is not to be a great scientist, not to be modern Prometheus. Find happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition. That is the message that Frankenstein gives to Walton at the end of the book, the last 2 pages of Frankenstein. Find happiness in tranquility. The entire book and this album, I would argue, can be seen as the voyage from trying to tranquilize the ocean to find happiness, to finding happiness in tranquility. This guy's married, he co-writes music with his wife. He needs to find happiness in that. If this album is a certain extent about writer's block, perhaps it would have been better if he never unblocked himself at all. I talk all the time in this channel about how often artists sacrifice themselves to make art and how it's never worth it. It's always better. It's always better if a human being lives. It would be better if we didn't have Nirvana than if if Kurt Cobain could have found help without the influence of fame, right? Who knows? Who knows if he could have, right? That's the example I like to give. So, wow. I think it makes sense, the sadness of this album, because creation of the album itself is drawing yourself in parallel with these tragic figures of Walton and Frankenstein. That's the message. Find happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition. Now here's my ocean tranquilizing ambitious album. So let me give you an example of this album with my favorite song, Click Above Frankenstein, Above Frankenstein. I'm going to explain that to you at the end of the video too. It's one of the coolest things I've ever found. It's so cool. You skip to the end if you don't want to watch me talk about the National, or if you're still pissed about me not knowing, or if you're annoyed by this. I have some kind of dermatological nightmare happening in my life. I don't know what it is. I'm seeing a doctor. Don't worry about me. But if it seems red, because it is. I don't know what to tell you, bud. Your mind is not your friend, okay? So click there to listen to this song with Phoebe Bridgers. My daughter is becoming a Boy Genius super fan, so she was very happy to hear these songs with Phoebe Bridgers, who I sometimes call Phoebe D. Bridgers because I can't help myself, but I know her name is Phoebe. And this is a great example of the subtlety and the gorgeousness of this album. It's kind of a playful sounding piano. Atmospheric sounds are added in, layers of their production, just layers. It's kind of a waltz. It reminds me a lot of Nick Cave, actually. Matter of fact, I think if you put this song next to his cover of the song Death Is Not the End, it rhymes. Your mind is not your friend. Death is not the end. There's a kind of semi-grand, almost campy gothness to this song that I think you hear in Nick Cave as well. Then we had this great chorus, and then after this chorus, we have this like very slow snare and bass drum that starts to punctuate itself. Little tiny details like piano tickling more. And then listen, pay attention how carefully the guitar comes in. This is miraculous production, just miraculously subtle and well thought up of. And these just very, very sad lyrics, very in keeping with Frankenstein, very in keeping with here. Your imagination is an awful place. Don't believe in manifestation. Your heart will break. Find happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition. Then this duet comes with this chorus, and it's so gorgeous. Phoebe D's voice, along with Behringer's voice, is so great. I like his voice, but it doesn't draw me in. It's not like my favorite part. I think his lyrics are my favorite part of this whole band. And I like his voice, but having someone she's doing this great sort of up and down harmonizing in the back. I know that she's very well recognized, but I think she might be an underappreciated singer, just her voice. Don't you understand? Your mind is not your friend again. It takes you by the hand and leaves you nowhere. This is the problem. This is the problem with ambition, okay? This could be... This whole album could be part of a musical to Frankenstein, to Dr. Frankenstein. Couldn't you imagine, okay, this is the final scene of Frankenstein, and right before dying, spoiler, right before dying, Dr. Frankenstein gets up and sings to Walton, excuse me. Don't you understand? Your mind is not your friend again. Find happiness in tranquility and avoid all ambition. It really is the title track to the album. This is the center of the album because this is the song where he says, tranquilize the oceans between the poles, you're crawling under roots and climbing into holes. This is that pain of ambition. The guitar gets more and more pronounced at the end, increasingly epic. All these drums and strings and all these things are happening. But the whole time it never loses its intimacy. And maybe that's the magic of their production. Maybe this is I don't know. I'm going to give Destiner the credit because this is what he was able to do for Taylor Swift. To make things grand and intimate at the same time, epic and intimate at the same time, it's very spectacular. Ew, what a gross term. Very spectacular. So I'm going to go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker. The first 2 tracks are like the worst part of the album. So, what do you say? Once Upon a Poolside, featuring Sufjan Stevens. I like it, but this just... it just sounds like a Taylor Swift song. That's how it sounds to me. Don't get mad at me, okay? Hey, are you a The National fan? Don't get pissed at me. I just talked 20 minutes. I hope I have helped to better contextualize what this album has to do with Frankenstein. So don't get pissed that I'm just saying it sounds like a Taylor Swift song. But it just does. And that's a compliment. Because, let's face it, Taylor Swift is a better songwriter than The National. Oops, I'm sorry I said it. She is. The melody here is very Bruce Springsteen-y. Very kind of raspy voice. I like Bruce Springsteen, but I don't like things that sound like Bruce Springsteen. So maybe that's why I don't like this that much. I do like the kind of choir of Oz that come in the second verse. But again, just more of these great lyrics. I'm not doing anyone any kind of favors, watching airplanes land and sink into the pavement. Just beautiful. And what's that worried thing you said to me? This is where I wrote down the notes of where I was. I was just like sitting alone on a rock, surrounded by people in their yacht gear, eating Wegmans Mountain Mix and just listening to this album. I just realized that like this album could really suit any emotion. Don't make this any harder. This is a theme throughout the album about things being harder and things not helping. And this is why I think it's useful as a depression album, because when you're depressed, you don't want anything... when you're depressed, right? Or when you're in a depressed state. And again, you can be depressed and happy at the same time. It's weird, but it's true. I am an example. Okay, I am currently depressed, and I'm currently happy. So I can tell you, when I'm in that depressed state, I feel like everything's making it harder. I'm very testy, okay? Like, my wife is just seriously one of the kindest people on earth, truly, And she's just trying to help me, and she'll just say something nice to me, and I'll somehow construe that as making something harder. And then when she tries to help me, I'll tell her this isn't helping. And I'm not yelling at her, I'm not breaking dishes or anything. It's just hard, and she's there for me, and she knows this will pass, everything's fine, But, yeah. Oops, I lost the class again. Sorry. Remember how I said this isn't a great song? It is great lyrics. The song is good, but it is great lyrics. Then we get to the song Eucalyptus, which is just this... nice song about a butterfly flying around eating eucalyptus. No, it's not. This is the most filler song. Cool kind of Tomorrow Never Dies style drum beat. The kind of like that kind of like edgy, like anticipatory drum beat. But it's a bunch of like whatabouts, And like the chorus is like, you should take it because I'm not going to take it. It's okay, but it's just not up to his standards as a lyricist. He does shout out a bunch of bands, including Cowboy Junkies. I haven't thought about Cowboy Junkies in a long time. You want to talk about a sad band? Man. Whew. I stole this from my friend Blair. Hey Blair, if you're watching this, I'll send this back to you. Man, it's a good album though. Oh, To Lay Me Down. Okay. It's kind of nostalgic, talking about these old bands. I think Afghan Wigs is even a Boston band, right? I mean, real, like, underground-y music from the late 80s and early 90s. And I really like the epic end here. I do like that, like the doubled vocals towards the end and the sort of big fills. So, it's the worst song on the album, but it's still quite listenable. Now, the next song is called New Order T-Shirt. Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that I made my own New Order t-shirt. Even more eagle-eyed viewers will notice that I misspelled the word substance. You see, I wrote it and I got nervous that it was going to be too small, so I made the S bigger and then the T bigger, and then I got nervous that I wouldn't have enough space, so I accidentally forgot the N, and then I made the E super big and tilted, so... Substance 1987. That's my New Order t-shirt. I made a special tier on Patreon. If you want to go to my Patreon, for $33, I will send you this exact t-shirt. I'm trying a new thing. Professor Skye, screen-worn merch. I don't know who would want it. My wife said I'm one step away from selling my bathwater on OnlyFans. Joke's on her. I take showers. New order t-shirt. Should I not have done that? Tell me in the comments if I'm losing it. Say like, Skye, bro, dude, whatever you're going through, don't be selling your dirty old t-shirts, you weirdo. So like, but I personally know that if one of my favorite YouTubers accidentally destroyed one of their own pieces of clothing by misspelling a name of one of the best albums of the 80s, I'd throw $30 at it. I would. That's just what I would do. Anyways, this song's great. It has a high electric guitar that sets a tone for this plucked acoustic guitar. Reminds me a lot of Bon Iver. I understand they're all kind of in that same zone. I don't know what I was doing not listening to the National. Just whatever. It's when you hit your mid-20s, you just don't believe new music can be good and you're just wrong. This is a very, very sweet love song. Very, very nostalgic. I mean, not just for awesome New Order t-shirts. Oh, quick note. Also, if you listen very carefully, there's a point where there's an actual New Order style drum fill on a drum machine snare. It's sort of an intentional kind of mark there. But this is just a very nostalgic take on a late 90s girlfriend, okay? Before my ex-wife was my wife, she was my girlfriend. Before she was my girlfriend, she was my ex-girlfriend. Before she was my ex-girlfriend, she was my girlfriend. So during that period of time in the late 90s, things were a lot easier than they would eventually become. A lot less complicated than they eventually become. And the kind of relationship that he's describing here reminds me of her, but also reminds me of any girlfriend that any of my friends had. The world that he's describing, it happens to be, I think, in Brooklyn, it happens to be someone else, but all the little details here, this is like so unbelievably nostalgic. Which, actually, come to think of it, the first couple chapters of Frankenstein are really nostalgic. Is he following all of Frankenstein? Is it like, can you, okay, listen, hey, I'm not done. You can do it though. Okay, I assign you. I'm your professor. You're an auditor. That means I don't give you grades, but you can watch classes. But still, I think it might be possible that you could trace out the entire album as following along. Because right here, this would be a good place for the second chapter in the third song. I don't know. But he's very nostalgic for his youth when things were good before he dedicated his life to ambition. But it's very sort of nostalgic. But it's just all these details in this song. Like tapping on a blue American Spirits. American Spirits are cigarettes owned by a huge multinational corporation called R.J. Reynolds, and they had a picture of a Native American as cultural appropriation, trying to fool young people into thinking that there's such a thing as a natural cigarette. As my brother, the doctor, once said, the Native Americans were wrong. It's never a good idea to light something on fire and inhale it. But this fooled people in the 90s into buying natural cigarettes, thinking they were buying better cigarettes, when they weren't. The only difference was they burned much, much, much slower. So if you ever smoke, I smoked for a couple of years in the late 90s. Very against type, but what are you going to do? If you were hanging around with someone who was smoking, so usually a cigarette takes 7 minutes to smoke. If someone was smoking American Spirit, it would be like 9 minutes. Very annoying. But all these little details too, like this little detail of like being arrested in Hawaii for like a custom bong or something, or bomb. I don't know what he says, but apparently according to Genius, he was arrested there. And so it's nice because it's an actual love story to the woman who I think he's actually with. Cool sequencers behind, again, very sort of New Order-y without sounding like it's trying to sound like New Order. It talks about the Kentucky Aquarium. This is a nice reminder. If you don't know, by the way, Cincinnati is not in southern Ohio. Cincinnati is in northern Kentucky. Okay? I understand that they... It seems, if you look on a map, and they're technically there, but listen, when you go to Cincinnati, and you go to Kentucky, and you go to Cleveland, come on. Cincinnati is not Columbus, is not Cleveland. Cincinnati is Kentucky. And it's very close. Like when you fly into Cincinnati, you have to fly into Northern Kentucky Airport. But I like this idea of like talking to a shark, I don't know. And I think the backup female singer might even be his wife, who turns out used to work at the New Yorker. A friend of mine works at the New Yorker. I wonder if Dave knows Karine. I'll have to text him later. Nice guy. Nice guy, Dave. This Isn't Helping is the next track. The first track with Phoebe Bridgers. 2 chords on the piano, plodding back and forth. And again, this is what depression is. This isn't helping, you know? And he's sort of like mad about the way that the person he's with is seeing the bright sides of things. You find beauty in anything. When you look down a sewer, you find a diamond ring. It isn't fair how you never look like you're trying, as if you couldn't care less. This is the feeling that you feel when you're feeling depressed, that everyone else has things figured out. Just in this, as he said, according to Genius, I was in a self-hating zone. And he thought, well, that's what I'm supposed to write about. And maybe that's what this whole album is about being in the self-hating zone. There's even sort of a conversation happening in this song where like someone kind of responds, where Phoebe sort of like responds to him, which is interesting. This isn't helping at all. I know you think it's kindness, but it's not. And that's depression. Because guess what, sad singer dude? It is helping. It is helping. When my wife is nice to me and offers something that makes me stressed out because she thinks it's going to make me less stressed out, that's on me. Next song is called Tropic Morning News, which has like an Idiotech by Radiohead drum beat. Another New Order-y style bass line, kind of speak singing. I think his voice is the most charismatic here. Apparently, according to Genius, this is about doom scrolling. It reminds me strongly of the song I'd Stop the World to Melt With You. Nice couple guitar solos in here. Then we get to the song Alien. Kind of, again, sort of in this Radiohead, sort of reminds me of like Kid A sounding synthesizers. Beautiful tone in the acoustic guitar. Just next time you listen to the song, if you are a National superfan, if you are a nationalist, is that what you call yourself? If you're if you're an extreme nationalist, that's what you call yourself if you're a fan of the National. Listen to the acoustic guitar tone. It's just gorgeous. I'm 100% positive that he just saw the movie Nope and decided to write a song about it. Because drop down like an alien in a cloud, and try not to worry about a voiceover. The candy blue sky is messing with our brains. That's how it is there. So it's cool though. I like it. You know, the feeling of kind of feeling alien and separated from people. Great compression sound. Like everything sounds very compressed here. I love the drums get super excited again on the back half. And there appears to be a sort of dirty Stratocaster solo. Stratocaster, this kind of guitar right here. And it has a certain tone, but it's a little bit dirty. It's kind of nice. Next track is the track that probably everyone's going to listen to first, The Alcott with Taylor Swift. Piano sounds. It sounds a lot like a Taylor Swift song. It's kind of an altz. It's kind of a waltz. This video is so bad. I forgot the W. L take, Professor Skye. L take. Hey, speaking of letters, if you like this video but you don't want to say anything, AVAA is what you say to me. That means awesome video as always. I see AVAAs, I throw a little heart on them. I love seeing AVAAs. I know what it's like to watch a video and you love it and you want to say that you love it, but you don't want to type anything. That's for losers. Cool kids say AVAA, and then I go by and I throw a heart on those. And I read every comment, by the way. I don't respond to all of them. The kids tell me it makes me seem desperate. I read them all, though. It's basically my favorite hobby, besides making the videos. This is interesting, you know, the sort of exoticism. Taylor Swift has this great ability to write these songs about places that are places of privilege. You know, this feels like it's a hotel bar in a fancy hotel, kind of like the way she writes about Newport, but she does it in a way that it's not very alienating. And then the chorus, it has to be Taylor. Like, these lyrics are so good. And the last thing you wanted is the first thing I do. I tell you my problems, you tell me the truth. That's got Taylor written all over it. That ability that Taylor has to write a combination of words that seems so simple and so self-evident that you think 1,000 people have written it, but no, she's the one who wrote it. I tell you my problems, you tell me the truth. That's the last thing you wanted me to do? The last thing you wanted is the first thing I do. I tell you that I think I'm falling back in love with you. The whole story is told right here. It's so gorgeous. And there's back and forth with her and him, where she's sort of saying ridiculously Taylor-style lyrics like shred my evening gown, read my sentence out loud, because I love this curse on our house. I don't like this. I don't like this because A Curse on a House, this is, I believe, a reference to Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, plague on both your houses. I want to stay here, okay? I don't want to go to Shakespeare. If I'm going to go to things I read in high school, I want to stick Well, actually, I didn't read Romeo and Juliet. When I used to read Shakespeare in high school, I would just skip all of the speeches and just read the other bits. I missed all the good parts. It'd be like watching a kung fu movie and skipping the fights, you know? So I'd read Shakespeare and be like, prithee to say, hark, who goes? Skip, 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 skip. 'Tis true, make haste we must. Gentlemen Roman, lend me your ears. Skip, 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 skip. Anyways, curse on both our houses. Okay. Next song is called Grease in Your Hair. This has kind of a solemn church organ, a reverb guitar happening here, beautiful sounds. It's funny because, I was listening to this album and I was in that very dark place in Saratoga Springs. There's a bridge that goes over this lake, and I'm walking over this bridge for like the 50th time because I just get going to a regatta is very weird because like your kid only goes for like 1 second and you can't see them. Like I couldn't see her. I think I might have saw her. She might have been a little blob in the background, but I don't know, So I'm just in this place, and then I see Joe, a friend of mine, Joe, and like I know him from before. And like I see him and I shake hands and I'm like super happy. And then he goes off with his kid and I go off to wait for my daughter's race. And then all of a sudden like I press play again because I just stopped halfway through Grease in Your Hair. And all of a sudden it seems like this really happy song and I'm really enjoying all the layers. It has this great ending and it's beautiful. And it ends with magnets, talking about magnets. Magnets are a theme in this album, very tied into this concept of the North Pole. I think the North Pole, the trip to the North Pole represents the artistic process that he is embarking on to try to attain some form of immortality or legacy that is at odds with his ability to be happy. Ice machines, great odd backward sounds, layers of guitars all over the place, interesting lyrics about poetic disassociation. So I get this way quite often. I'm not a poet, but if I were a poet, I would be a poet of of just sort of thinking about things that I see and putting, it seems like he's just in a motel and he's just saying what he sees. Cartoons from a television, whistles from the street, blackout curtains, summer sirens, electricity. Just like he's able to describe what it is and he has this distance from it. And just by recontextualizing what he's seeing with distance, it makes it interesting. Like it makes it poetic. You read into it. I don't need ice machines. I don't need speaker systems. I don't need white lights blinking. I don't need you to witness. I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need anything. Very sad. You get the sense of someone alone in a hotel room feeling very sad, feeling like he doesn't need anything. Also reminds me a little bit of the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin. I don't need you. I don't need anybody. All I need is this telephone. I need this telephone and this tennis racket. Anyways. I don't know what to say to people. It only makes things worse. That's how I felt. Unless I was talking to Joe, in which case, it was super decent seeing Joe. Your Mind Is Not Your Friend is the penultimate track. Speaking of penultimate, my daughter came in second to last place in her race. But she had a good race because she liked her team. Last time she came, she didn't get a medal, and she was really sad the whole way home. This time, she was just happy because she had more camaraderie with her classmates, with her boat, with other people on her boat. It made me happy because she finally won. The only way to win team sports is to like your team. That's it. She actually won. Like, she understood what Matt Berringer and what Victor von Frankenstein and what Walton didn't understand. She understands it's not about ambition. It's about human connection. Way to go, goat. The final track is called Send For Me, and I can only listen to the song once. It's so meaningful, it just made me cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. Because I'm sitting there for reasons I'm about to explain, and I'm very sad. I'm in a hard place, and every time it's just some guy saying, if you're in a bad place or a sad place, I will be there for you. If you're sitting in an airport and you don't want to go, I'll be there for you. And it ties you into that previous thing about making it harder and not helping and watching the airplanes land. You think about someone being a rock star and he's in hotels and airports and he's talking to somebody and he's saying, if you're like in an elevator and you feel sad, to send for me, I'll be there. It reminds me of the song Lean On Me, another song that can make me cry anytime. If you're in an insane asylum and you need me, call on me, send for me. If you're crying in a gift shop, crying in a gift shop. So if you've ever been, if a gift shop, this is one of those if you know, you know. There's only one reason that a gift shop would make you cry, and that's if you have been to a gift shop in a hospital while somebody you care for is dying. That's what he's talking about. That's what connected to me. This guy is an amazing lyricist. And what I think, and I don't know. I don't know. But what I think is this is him talking to himself. I think there's a part of him inside of himself that is being nurturing, that is reaching out to him, to not be Walton, to not be Victor von Frankenstein out on the ice floats, to not try to tranquilize the ocean, but to find happiness and tranquility. And I think that's what it is. It's him pulling himself back in at the end of the album. That's what I hope. So there's my review. Now, hopefully I didn't lose you. You want to hear my super personal story? Here you go. I didn't understand why I was so sad in Saratoga Springs. I really didn't. Like I said, I love driving with my daughter. It's a fun thing. It's like the third time we've done it. I reviewed Kendrick once after doing it. Yeah, it's great, It's one of the great things about being a parent is being inconvenienced in that kind of way and finding a way to make the best of it. And then as I was leaving, I looked down and I saw, because Saratoga, there's a bunch of horse tracks there. I saw these fences and I was like, oh yeah, my dad spent some time in Saratoga. And then I realized that the last real conversation my father had on planet Earth before he died, I was in the hospital with my son, and he was telling my son about the time when he would go with his stepfather to Saratoga Springs to buy and sell racehorses, because that's what my step-grandfather did. For some reason, that was the last thing on planet Earth that my father said while his mouth was filled with blood. It was a very unpleasant experience. The gift shop. So, I didn't think of that the entire time I was there. I was just sad and distant and just miserable, and I had absolutely no idea that it was because just the word Saratoga brings me back to that hospital room and the mouth and the story and my step-grandfather, and I didn't even know. While reading Frankenstein, he talks about his mother died right before he went to college, which is bizarre because my dad's mother died before he went to college. He went to Princeton in 1958, and she died the summer before he went. And it's fascinating, too, because my dad also spent his entire life trying to find alternatives to the standard model, whether it's physics or history or whatever. Like, my dad was an eccentric kook who didn't succeed in anything he tried, but he had that ambition, and he did really sacrifice his family, me, my brothers, for that ambition. So it's interesting because, there's a real parallel between Victor von Frankenstein and my dad, which I never thought about until I read this book, until I had this album. But when describing the grief that he feels for his mother's death, Mary Shelley says, "Why should I describe a sorrow that all have felt and must feel?" That's why you read books, okay? That's why. Why should I describe a sorrow that all have felt? That's a good line. That's great. And must feel. We all must feel grief. We must. That is an essential element of being a human being, is feeling grief. So anyways, that's why I saved it to the end. I hope you like this video. Feel free to go on my patreon.com if you want to win this exact t-shirt. I don't think anyone will do it. I'll keep it up for a week and then I'll erase it in shame if no one buys it. But what the hell, right? All right, until next time, there's the camera.